Carrigafoyle Castle is a beautiful place today. Despite the damage it has suffered, it still towers over the Shannon. It's really worth visiting, even though it is quite a climb to the top. Sitting on an inlet from the Shannon, nestled behind Carrig Island, it is a very tranquil place. So too is the church that overlooks it. Both the church and the castle were built by Conor Leah O'Connor Kerry in the late 15th century. His father John or Sean O'Connor Kerry built the nearby Lislochton Abbey. Both the castle and the latter, not forgetting its magnificent cross, are demonstrations of the wealth of the O'Connor Kerry sept in the 15th and 16th centuries. This wealth was based on the strategic position of Carrigafoyle. Referred to occasionally as the guardian of the Shannon, it stands watch over the Shannon estuary. Its position was used by O'Connor Kerry to extract a toll from the ships heading to Limerick, something which was often a subject of complaint in that city. Although this toll allowed O'Connor Kerry to flourish, the lordship was in a difficult position, as it was caught between the Earls of Desmond to the west and the Fitzmaurices, also known as the Lord Kerry, to the east and south. O'Connor Kerry was a client of the Earl of Desmond. However, the latter was quite skilled at keeping O'Connor Kerry and Fitzmaurice divided, for, if they had come together against Desmond, O'Connor Kerry and Fitzmaurice would easily have dominated North Kerry. In 1567, Gerald Fitzgerald, the Earl of Desmond, was arrested by the English. He would spend 5 years imprisoned, much of this time in England. His cousin, James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald, was left in charge of the military affairs of the earldom. In 1568, he led a large force against the Fitzmaurices of Leigh. Despite having a strong force, and probably outnumbering his enemy, James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald was defeated in the Battle of Leigh. Accompanying James Fitzmaurice were Conor Fionn O'Connor Kerry and his son Brian. Both of them were killed. The loss of Conor, leader of the sept, and his heir apparent, greatly weakened the power of O'Connor Kerry in the last quarter of the 16th century. Even worse, after the Battle of Leigh, Conor Baccock succeeded the lordship. However, he would die 5 years later in 1573. His heir, Sean na Gotach, or Sean of the Battles, was a minor, allowing the Earl of Desmond to make James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald ward of the latter. Fitzmaurice took possession of Carrigafoyle, increasing the power of the Earl of Desmond. At this point, it is worth pausing the narrative to describe the castle itself. It consisted of a large 5-storey tower which is slightly higher than 24 metres. Its walls are over 2 metres thick and are built out of what the official account calls neatly laid small stones, giving it a different appearance from most castles. The ceilings of the 2nd and 4th stories were vaulted. The main entrance to the castle was on the east and was located so that the tide could not reach it. Access to the upper floors was through a spiral staircase which remains and is open to the public. Apparently there are 104 steps to the top. However, I did not count them. As you climb the stairs, you come across a series of rooms. Access to the tower or roof on the seaward side is not permitted, but there is a relatively large open space facing inland. Due to its height, it has a great view. The castle was purposely built between the high and low water marks of the Shannon. Indeed, the Shannon was an important part of its defence, as originally the castle formed a small island. It was fortified by 2 curtain walls. The inner one, which enclosed the castle, had rounded turrets, while the outer wall on the north, south and west of the castle had square corner towers. Between these curtain walls, better known as bawns, was an area used as a dock for boats. While the inner bawn no longer exists, part of the landward side of the outer wall still exists. It's 21 metres long and 2 metres thick before extending into the square turret measuring 6 metres by 4 metres, believed to have been used as a dovecot, in other words, a pigeon house. It's a cleverly built castle, taking great advantage of its location. Indeed, in his book on the Fitzmaurices, Martin Moore quotes the historian Declan Downey as saying it was inspired by Torre de Belém in Lisbon. This makes some sense, as both castles stood guard over harbours and estuaries. In the 16th century, many believed it was a very strong castle. Indeed, in 1573 the Bishop of Cork stated, quote, that it was the strongest and most beautiful castle in the west of Munster. End quote. However, warfare was changing, and very soon the strongest of Irish castles would quickly fall to cannon. Returning to the narrative, James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald had been made ward of the heir of the O'Connor Kerry lordship. There are also some reports that he had married the widow of the previous lord, though it is unsure how true these are. Nevertheless, he got possession of the castle. This would give Carrigafoyle a central role in the upcoming rebellion. Dissatisfied with the continued imprisonment of the Earl of Desmond, as well as the land-grabbing exercises of Peter Carew, and also in defence of the Catholic religion, Fitzmaurice rebelled in 1569, beginning what would be called the First Desmond Rebellion. This rebellion was quickly and bloodily put down. Eventually, Fitzmaurice fled to the continent, looking for aid from continental powers to fight Elizabeth. He was one of the first lords to try to link the fight against Elizabethan centralisation to the Catholic cause. This was probably the first use of what Hiram Morgan calls faith and fatherland in an Irish war against Elizabeth. Munster remained troubled during his exile, something Fitzmaurice hoped to take advantage of. In 1577, Pope Gregory XIII granted him an indulgence and remission of sins to those who would fight for him in Ireland. However, Philip of Spain was at this time trying to avoid a war with England and refused him support. After various escapades, Fitzmaurice and around 60 men left La Ferrol in Spain in June 1579. Accompanying him was Nicholas Sander, an English Catholic priest in exile. He acted as a papal envoy. They landed in the Dingle Peninsula on the 17th of July, where they hoped to trigger a religious rebellion. They fortified an ancient promontory fort in Limerick harbour called O′Neill, or the Fort of Gold. While Fitzmaurice may have wanted to fight a religious war, the immediate impact of his landing was to cause what is called the Second Desmond Rebellion. Initially, the Earl of Desmond opposed Fitzmaurice. Indeed, it was the government's heavy-handed and panicked response to the landing of Fitzmaurice and Sander which appears to force the Earl into rebellion. Although Fitzmaurice had landed in Desmond's territory, the Earl was not allowed to fight him alone by the government. In a signal that he was not trusted, Sir Nicholas Malby, a militant Protestant, was sent to fight Fitzmaurice. His actions soon alienated many. Desmond and Fitzmaurice's forces skirmished with each other. Although this was inconsequential, Fitzmaurice's forces were prevented from doing much, though they did attack Dingle town. Then things exploded. On the 1st of August, Desmond's brother, known as John of Desmond, killed Henry Davos and another English official in Tralee and came out in rebellion. Previously, there had been friction between John of Desmond and the Earl, especially since the birth of the Earl's son. However, the response of the English administration to the murders failed to take advantage of this. Rather, it made things worse and pushed the Earl towards rebellion. William Drury, Lord Justice, and the Earl argued over the way to respond, resulting in the temporary arrest of the latter. This inflamed his supporters. Shortly afterwards, the Earl of Desmond was proclaimed a traitor. In the meantime, John of Desmond had joined Fitzmaurice in O′Neill. However, they soon squabbled with each other. Fitzmaurice left the fort and headed northwards and was killed in August as a result of a petty fight. Drury died in October 1579, resulting in Malby gaining greater power and helping to push Desmond into rebellion. Drury was replaced as Lord Justice by William Pelham. His response to the rebellion was energetic. In early March, he advanced into Kerry, supported by the Earl of O′Neill. Their force raided and burned as it advanced, often killing innocent civilians. Pelham also ensured his campaign would be supported by sea. This was vital for the use of artillery, as heavy, cumbersome cannon could not easily be transported over land. His aim was to first attack the Geraldine strongholds along the Shannon, thereby boxing in Desmond and ultimately eliminating him. In contrast to this, Desmond and his forces took a more lethargic approach, perhaps hoping that time and the Irish climate would defeat the English forces. While this was not always a bad strategy, in this case it was disastrous, as events showed. Carrigafoyle was the first stronghold on the list. The English may well have believed that capturing it would have a huge impact on the morale of Desmond's force. Pelham reached there on the 25th of March. The weather was bad, hindering the English advance and forcing them to move along the coast, losing several men to drowning. Neither Desmond nor any of his supporters took advantage of this. Another bad mistake. Pelham was met at Carrigafoyle by some ships. These carried Pelham's artillery pieces and had some light cannon of their own. Unloading the artillery from the ships and reassembling them took some time, 3 or 4 days according to Pelham. During this time the garrison of the castle could do little, except take shots when opportunities arose. One English soldier was killed and an important officer, William Stanley, was wounded by these shots. Stanley would later become infamous. He was in charge of a garrison in Deventer in the Netherlands, which he handed over to the Spanish in 1587. There was little else the Carrigafoyle garrison could do, as they were massively outnumbered. It was held by around 66 soldiers. 16 of these were Spaniards, though some of these could have been Italian. They had been part of the force brought by Fitzmaurice to Limerick, and who the Earl of Desmond used to strengthen his forces. The castle was also commanded by a Spaniard, a military engineer called Julian. It's not clear how large the English force facing them was. Certainly it was at least 1,000, maybe even 2,000 men. It was also supported by some ships. In the famous drawing of the battle, 3 ships are present, though one of these was quite small. Nevertheless, Carrigafoyle was regarded as a strong castle. One English official called it strong by nature and art. Maybe Desmond believed it was strong enough to last a long siege, as Castlemaine had previously. However, the artillery Pelham brought would make a difference. First, the artillery had to be unloaded from the ships. This was a very slow process. A culverin and a saker were landed on the 26th and 27th of March and assembled the following day. On the 28th of March, 2 demi-cannon were landed. It was only the following day that they were remounted and were ready. The bombardment began at noon that day, continuing until 6 in the evening. Another demi-cannon was added to the battery the following day, the 30th of March. Pelham took great care in positioning the cannon, claiming that he planted them so that the tower, or part of it, would fall into the ditch in the Bawn, thereby filling it in. From the illustration of the siege, the cannon were planted either side of the nearby church, built by O'Connor Kerry and used by the garrison in peaceful times. Sometime at the beginning of the siege, Captain Julian was called upon to surrender. This was rejected. To the annoyance of the English, Julian and the garrison, quote, railed against Her Majesty, end quote. In other words, they jeered her and said that they held it for the King of Spain. Since England and Spain were not yet officially at war, Philip II might have not been too pleased about this, though. Once the bombardment started, the fate of the garrison was sealed. On the 30th of March, the bombardment began quite early. Around 2 in the afternoon, part of the tower collapsed, filling in the ditch and some of the flankers, thereby allowing the English to assault it. The storming party was led by Captain Makeworth. His men quickly captured the outer Bawn. Driven back into the tower, some of the garrison tried to escape by swimming, but were killed. The remainder fell back into one of the turrets of the tower, but they soon surrendered. All were immediately killed. Only Julian and 6 other Spaniards, as well as some women, were initially spared. But these were hung the same day, apart from Julian. The latter was kept alive for a couple of days to obtain intelligence. Indeed, he may well have been tortured to obtain this. Afterwards, he was hung. The entire garrison and all the civilians in the castle were either killed, put to the sword is what the English officials used for this, or hung, a mark of things to come. By way of contrast, the English claimed to have only lost 6 men in the siege. Following the outcome of the siege, several other of Desmond's castles soon surrendered. The Earl himself would be killed in 1583. However, this was not the final conflict involving Carrigafoyle. In the 9 Years' War, it switched hands a few times. After the Spaniards landed in Kinsale, Sean the Gaeltacht would recapture it. He fought at Kinsale and afterwards participated in and survived O'Sullivan Bearer's epic march to Ulster. After the war, he would get the castle back. However, it would be the subject of further fighting in the Cromwellian Wars. Defeat in these resulted in the loss of the castle again. Indeed, it was granted to Trinity College, while the leader of the O'Connor Kerry lordship was executed in Tralee. Some decades later, defeat in the Williamite War led to the final disappearance of the O'Connor Kerry sept. By way of a postscript, Mary McAuliff has a very interesting article on the folklore related to O'Connor Kerrys and Carrigafoyle, specifically what parts of the turbulent 16th and 17th century appear in folklore and what parts don't. No spoilers here. Go read the article.